Melanie, if you don't mind. Awesome. Um, we have a really ambitious and great session today, so I want to get started on time so we have time for everything that we have planned. Welcome everyone to the Neonatal Justice Collaborative January General Body Meeting. We have 2 of these virtual meetings a year and 2 in-person meetings a year, and so this is our January meeting. And today we're going to be focused on NICU health equity rounds. I'm really excited about this topic because all of us on this call, I'm sure, want to understand how we can make change and have actionable steps towards health equity. And so this is one way in which we can do that. And NICU health equity rounds isn't really done standardly across the country in NICUs. What we do pretty standardly is talk about medical cases, complexities, what could we have done differently, rare diagnoses, and we all get together in hospitals and talk about family stories from a medical perspective. But what we don't tend to do is focus on social complexities or social inequities and how those impacted NICU families and their healthcare outcomes. And so there's a move now to really have that be a central aspect of education in the hospital. So we're really excited to hear from the experience of Drs. Morosco and Dr. Paul, who are at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, who've conducted these health equity rounds. So we'll go through their experience. They're going to present to us how they've done things at CHOP. And then we'll be talking in small groups about how other folks have done it, because there's a lot of different ways to conduct these types of sessions. And so we'll talk about what's worked well and what hasn't, and any exposure that you have or haven't had to NICU health equity rounds. First, I'll start with some general NJC announcements, and then we have Chanel here, who's going to talk to us about an opportunity to get involved in a multi-institution effort for health equity rounds. So they'll present that idea to you guys quickly, and then we'll have our small group discussions with our experiences with NICU health equity rounds as the last part of the meeting. And then our usual follow-up survey for NJC. So just to make sure you guys are all aware for upcoming events. So we have a works in progress meeting next scheduled for February 21st. We had a really exciting works in progress meeting in early December. And so this will be our next session. We're still looking for speakers. So if you're interested and you want to present an idea that you've had for your scholarly work or research, if you have specific aims, if you're applying for a grant, if you're pretty far into a project already and want the expertise and input from folks across the country, then you're welcome to present. And so there's a Google QR code that goes to a form. So that very first QR code is how to sign up to be a speaker at that event. We also have a Policy and Advocacy Subcommittee meeting coming up in January 31st, which is highlighting Dr. Emily Miller. So we know that policy and neonatology are not, there's many different ways to pursue a career that marries both of those 2 fields. And it's not really a standardized thing that a lot of people go through. And so Dr. Miller will share her experience and how she's been able to pursue that type of career. So really great for early career trainees. We'll be at PAS. So that's just a reminder. That's pretty far out still, May 4th in Toronto. The next medical education subcommittee meeting is March 15th. And then just a general reminder, because a lot of these events are, changed or added. There's a calendar that we do our best to keep updated on our website. So if you go to our website and click calendar, that should have the most up-to-date information. And in general, on our homepage, we have a newsletter with all of our upcoming events. And then if you look in the archived section, there's all the past newsletters and recordings of these meetings, so that if you have conferences or other clinical duties that are coming up, then you will still be able to learn from all of the education that's happening. And then this QR code is for the Policy and Advocacy Subcommittee meeting to RSVP to that. There's also an exciting conference at UCLA, February 7th. And so this is, the title of the conference is Addressing Disparities in Maternal, Fetal, and Neonatal Health. Doctors Valencia Walker, Diana Montoya Williams, and Anima Sobnis are all speaking at that conference. So really relevant to us, and also a lot of our NJC leaders will be there sharing their expertise and providing that education on healthcare disparities, and more importantly, implementing actionable ways to address those disparities in clinical care, scholarly activities, and medical education. And there's a hands-on part of the workshop for those who would be able to attend in person, but many of the folks on this call wouldn't be. There's also, I think, a webinar section. And so in the chat, thank you, Stephanie, for dropping the links for how to register for the in-person and the webinar versions. And then we also want to make sure that you all are aware of an opportunity to get more involved with NJC. So every 2 years, our subcommittee leaders rotate. And so we have elections coming up this spring. We don't have a lot of time to talk about every position that's open and what that entails, but Melanie made an amazing PowerPoint that talks about the NJC in general, what the subcommittee leaders do, what their roles entail, and thus what you would be signing up for in this PowerPoint and the QR code at the top. And then there's a interest form for the bottom QR code that indicates your interest of being a leader. And so that is due March 15th. So take a look at the form and fill it out if you're interested after you've reviewed the PowerPoint. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions, but want to give an early heads up because today we're opening those applications and then they'll be due in March. And then we'll review all of those applications and choose leaders as an executive leadership team, and we'll be able to announce those new leaders for our first in-person session at PAS. Wanted to check in to see if Uche was on the call. I wanted to make a brief announcement for the Med Ed meeting, or we could do that at the end too, or via chat if that's helpful.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to do a brief announcement. We have our upcoming medical education speaker series that will be March 15th, Friday, at 1 p.m. Central Time, 2 p.m. Eastern. I'm still confirming our speaker, but once I get confirmation in 1 to 2 weeks, we will send that information out to you guys. Also be on the lookout. We're working on piloting a kind of scholars program within NJC focused on neonatal health equity leadership and mentorship. And would love volunteers to serve as content experts, mentors, etc. So more information to come soon.
Great. Thanks so much, Uche. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it to Dr. Marusco and Dr. Paul to share their experiences at CHOP with us, developing their NICU health equity curriculum.
Thank you so much for having us. So I can start with introducing myself. My name is Katie Paul. I just completed fellowship at CHOP, and now I'm faculty at the University of North Carolina. And I'm so excited to be here alongside my colleague, Daria, who is stayed at CHOP and is currently faculty there. And we are really looking forward to sharing this health equity conference that we were able to create over the course of 3 years of our fellowship at CHOP, which continues to live on there. The next slide is just kind of a brief overview of what we're planning to cover in this short presentation. So we hope to explain kind of why, obviously I think everyone on this call thinks that a health equity conference is of some value, but why specifically we felt like it was needed at our institution, and to really just give an example of what this looked like for our division and maybe what it could look like for your division if you are thinking about this, and to be really transparent about what we saw as the particular strengths of what we created and what we thought could have been done differently. And we're really hopeful that sharing our experience is going to provide the springboard from which we can all have a great discussion about how to optimize the creation of these kinds of conferences, that we will all be able to inspire each other in this work, and that we will all be able to learn from each other. All right. So this project first really started off with a pain point. So as first year fellows at CHOP, Daria and I were both serving in one of the CHOP affiliated hospitals, and we were caring for two patients who both had the same rare condition. They both had subcutaneous fat necrosis after therapeutic hypothermia. And one of the infants was white and the other infant was black. And we felt like we really noticed a stark contrast in how the infants and ultimately their families were being cared for. When we observed this and talked about it together, it felt really clear to us that there were inequities at play, and that both systemic racism and provider bias were impacting the health outcomes for both of these infants, and in particular, for the worst, for the Black infant. So we knew that these differences in care probably occurred in small and large ways across all of the CHOP NICUs, as well as all of the NICUs across the country. And we were very cognizant that the vast majority of the bias that we do encounter, whether it comes from ourselves or from others, is unconscious, making it even harder to identify or seek to rectify. And we really wanted the opportunity to explore and unpack this specific experience within our division. We hoped that creating a format that would allow our division to come together at regular intervals to kind of talk through and think through these questions through the lens of real life cases that we had all encountered, would be kind of the most impactful way of doing this. So we were really lucky, and Daria is going to kind of delve into the nitty gritty of actually how we did it, but we had some incredible mentorship and really strong advocates who helped us get there. And before we tell you about what the conference itself looks like, we just kind of want to, I know we're all scientists here. We want to be grounded in the literature and the evidence. And so I just want to tell you guys about how the literature supports that physicians, nurses, frontline clinicians, really anyone who's taking care of patients, we're all taking more and more notice and thinking about the challenges of providing equitable care in the United States. And as we're doing that, we're really having a reckoning with this profound impact that unconscious bias has on the experience of patients when they encounter the healthcare system. So there's many different ways that this can be addressed, but if you look at the literature, you can see that there are different institutions that have really tried to create actual health equity curriculum similar to what we did. And the goal of these health equity curriculums is really to create our own toolkit to both be able to describe and understand what we're seeing, as well as to possibly intervene. And for programs that have gone ahead and created a curriculum similar to the one we developed and then spoke to participants and got data about it afterwards, participants have typically rated their experience very highly. And then this is kind of out of the medical sphere a little bit, but there are very strong evidence-based strategies from other fields, particularly social and cognitive psychology research, that offer strategies that can truly help to mitigate bias in real time. And some of those evidence-based strategies we tried to weave into our health equity curriculum, which I'll tell you a little bit more about on the next slide. So with that particular foundation in mind, kind of the pain point and thinking about that literature, we decided that when we created this conference, we would really build it around one real life case that had occurred in one of our units, where patient care suffered as a result of either interpersonal and or structural racism and discrimination. And we really hoped that in utilizing cases that many of us had been part of or had heard about and could really personally reflect on, that would help create buy-in and a feeling of personal investment. We also wanted to use a common vocabulary to understand structural racism, implicit biases, and health inequities. And the goal was really to try to describe these events and impart the participants with the motivation and ability to identify our own personal biases and behaviors as individuals. So kind of wrap more to self-reflect rather than pointing out the foibles of others. And in doing this, we really wanted to kind of go through the facts and have discussion points in much in the same way that we would if we were going through an M&M or a clinical oriented conference. And then we hope to cement our knowledge base by presenting literature describing relevant historical and contemporary forces that drive inequity in healthcare, and particularly point out how those effects play out in our medical system, especially in the postpartum and neonatal population. And then we would go through the evidence-based tools for mitigating bias and try to engage with questions incorporated throughout the 1-hour conference. And each conference would end with specific questions for discussion, as well as ideas for next steps at both the individual, team, and institutional level. And Daria is going to tell you a little bit more about what exactly that looked like.
Thanks, Katie. So the conference structure that we landed on is based off the model that was developed for the Health Equity Round series at Boston Medical Center. And this is one of the first, if not the first, kind of attempts to do this kind of health equity rounds. It was developed by some of my very favorite humans at Boston Medical Center, and I was lucky enough to receive this when I was a resident there. And I witnessed firsthand just how transformative this kind of conference could be for the Department of Pediatrics, and how it made conversations happen that needed to be happening, and then how it spurred people to make actions and create change that truly benefited our patients. And so we wanted to borrow from this curriculum and hopefully have the same results at CHOP. The QR code here, just so you all know, is a link to the MedEd portal where the BMC Health Equity Pioneers outline sort of their process for creating this conference, have a ton of resources, including a lot of references, talk through a lot of the specific choices they made when developing their health equity rounds, and then even have some sample cases. So I highly recommend anyone who's thinking of starting something like this at their institution to go ahead and check this out. Should all be freely available. Next slide, please. And so using this BMC structure, this is sort of the overview of the way that our health equity cases go. This is a different QR code that's here right now, and I'll just point that out before I dive into this. This QR code is a link to the PowerPoint template that is shared with all of the health equity conference presenters at CHOP. And so it's a pretty basic PowerPoint, but we developed it in purposefully so that we can have some consistency between presentations, so that we can kind of stay true to our typical model. But in that template, you'll find links to our glossary, our ground rules, and our case series, or series learning objectives too. So please feel free to use that as a resource. And so the way our cases work is that we start with an introduction. We have developed learning objectives that we hope will be consistent throughout all of the health equity conference series. And then within each specific case, we have specific learning points for that conference. And that helps to kind of guide the focus of the case. We also share a glossary and review our ground rules, which I think are really important to say at the outset. This is kind of an invocation to remind folks why we're here, why this is important, how this conference is different from the typical conference that people are used to, like a clinical case conference, and to make sure that we are able to protect the psychological safety of all of our participants. And then, as Katie said, we use real cases that have occurred in our NICU. And truly, there is no shortage of cases we can discuss. And we have learned we really need to streamline to the very essential medical facts. which allows us to kind of walk away from the medical pieces that people are more comfortable and familiar with and really dive into the inequities that were experienced by the patient, the family, or the care provider. Next, we're very intentional about including data. And I think most of this stems from the fact that this is what physicians are kind of comfortable and familiar with. This is sort of the way that we as scientists have been kind of trained to approach things. And then the flip side of that is that there is actually a huge and really rigorous evidence base that demonstrates how specific groups are disproportionately experiencing inequitable care. And I say that knowing that many of you have been ones to contribute to that evidence base. And so we want to highlight this scholarship around disparities research. And then we also are trying to kind of meet most of our participants where they are and speak their language as far as coming from an evidence-based place about why these issues matter. And then peppered throughout our conference, we have opportunities for reflection. And these are really key moments where we try to pause and give people space and time to really be intentional about confronting their own biases. And we try to have ways to have people kind of think, what would I have done in this situation? How might my actions be harming certain groups? And we really want to give them a little bit of opportunity to sit in that discomfort. And we use a mix of evidence-based strategies that have been shown to mitigate biases to facilitate some of those things. And then we also have a lot of opportunities for discussion. And we'll dive into that a little bit more on the next slide. And lastly, as Katie mentioned, we try to wrap up with opportunities for action and change. And we like to think about action happening across 3 levels, things that individuals can do, things that teams can do, and how we can advocate for change in the institution and beyond. And I think our hope here is that people recognize that there is a need for both individual anti-bias work and opportunities to recognize that institutional racism is a systems-wide problem that requires systems-level change. Next slide, and I'll hand it back over to Katie, I think.
All right. So to kind of dive a little bit deeper into those particular evidence-based strategies that have been shown to reduce bias and that we incorporated throughout our conference series. These are several specific tools that come from the social cognitive psychology research that I mentioned earlier. And they, I think, can feel a little more in the woo category or maybe more like touchy-feely. And so I just like to emphasize that they are rooted in rigorous research and have been studied and actually do kind of promote what we're looking for as a goal of this conference, which is really to try to get people to reflect and be in a place where they might be more emotionally open to thinking about ways in which we might be perpetuating bias as individuals and as a system. And so those tools include just going from left to right. First, just allowing time for having this safe, facilitated, interdisciplinary and case-based discussions. And the hope really is just that by creating this conference in general, we're creating a space where people feel like it's safe to ask, like, hey, I was kind of thinking this, does that seem right or wrong? Or maybe even if someone's not going to say that in the conference, bring up those topics so that there's some mental room to reflect on things and then maybe have smaller discussions later on. And then second, we wanted to create opportunities for individuation. So this is really trying to consider patients or families as individuals rather than members of a certain group. And we do that by focusing on their particular experience. So this can help us remember moments in our own lives when we might have felt like we had been stereotyped or wanted to be seen as an individual. And one particular method for doing that is perspective taking, which is one of the most frequently utilized tools in our conference. And this really involves just considering the perspective of another person by quite literally asking the audience members to put themselves in the shoes of that person. So this is the moment where if you're going through a clinical conference, you might ask the audience, okay, we have this data, and now we're trying to make a decision about what antibiotics to start. What antibiotics are you thinking? And then people hop in and kind of engage and defend their choice for vancomycin or whatever. But rather than that, we're saying, you are a NICU parent. You had to travel by 2 buses to get to your baby's bedside. And now that you're here, you're hearing this information. How does that literally hit you in this moment? And what are you thinking? So it's, again, it can sound kind of like a little more out there than just thinking what sort of antibiotic am I wanting to give, but has been shown to actually put people in a mindset where they're more open and receptive to other people's experiences. The next is increased interaction, which, we certainly can't necessarily guarantee with the conference that we're going to increase interaction between members of different groups. But the hope is that this might create some space for people who wouldn't normally interact on a regular basis to do so more often. And in so doing, increasing the likelihood that each encounter is going to be positive and decrease anxiety. And then lastly, there's, I feel like it always comes back to this, applying stress reducing techniques such as meditation and mindfulness to enhance positive emotional states and make it more likely that we are able to better participate in all of the steps before this. So in our conferences, we don't actually take a moment to meditate or anything like that. But I think just the moment of pause to think, what might I feel or think if I were in this situation, really kind of invites that moment for mindfulness. And then the next slide is really just to give you an example of some of the topics that we've covered. Like Daria said, there is a never-ending selection, and I think that's probably true no matter where you practice. But we first started with substance use and the use of urine drug screens in the NICU. We've also delved into care of LGBTQIA plus families, involvement in the child welfare system, police and security involvement in infant care, and maternal mental health. But that's just kind of a sampling of some of the topics that we've covered thus far. And then I will hand it back to Daria for the next slide.
Thank you. So that is a little bit of kind of the structure of what our current conferences look like, but we wanted to also take the opportunity to kind of peel back the layers of how we got to that sort of final product. And so just briefly, being mindful of time, this was kind of a long and iterative process. As Katie said, this was something that we had kind of conceived of as first-year fellows. So really first, we needed to assemble our stakeholders to include people with clout and experience. So we identified faculty champions, which warrant real call-outs. So that's Joanna Parga-Balinki and Dr. Diana Montoya Williams, as well as kind of gathering a group of individuals from our division who we kind of lovingly call our think tank. With their support as sort of kind of developing what we felt would be the framework for the conference, we then approached our institutional leadership, which included both nursing leadership and our divisional leadership, because we really wanted to make sure that this was something that would be supported. And we got pretty lucky that this was an idea that people were very receptive to and kind of gave us the go-ahead to pursue. And also went above and beyond to kind of introduce us and make sure that people knew how important it was to show up to this conference. We had our first test conference where we basically kind of piloted everything out and got a lot of informal feedback afterwards, and met again as a group to kind of decide how we wanted to restructure things a little bit moving forward. And I'll note that we continue to do these kind of very brief debriefs like immediately after every conference in order to kind of make sure that we're unpacking some of the things that happened during the conference and making sure that we're on the same page and we can kind of tweak things in like a QI kind of PDSA cycle moving forward. And then lastly, I think it was important to us to make sure that this was something that would be sustainable and would live on, and also wanted to recognize that, Katie and I had time and ability to do this as fellows, but this is kind of a big lift, and we wanted to make sure that there was a way that it would continue even if both of us moved on from the institution. And I'll speak a little bit more about how we did that in the next slide. And so the way that our conference runs now is that it is developed and delivered by our fellows. And so meeting with the fellowship leadership, we kind of sat down with them as this is a proposal that we wanted to task each one of our second year fellows with developing and presenting one of these conferences. Now, the way it works at CHOP is that fellows are the primary drivers of our noon conferences that happen every week. So it is very much already ingrained in our division that fellows do a lot of the preparation for these conferences, and that all faculty are expected to attend conferences. So we were able to kind of sneak this into the existing structure. And so with the faculty leadership, we work really closely with the fellows to support them in kind of putting these presentations together. I sit down with them. I have a lot of prep materials for them. And then most importantly, we meet and kind of talk about really what are things that they've noticed and what are frustrating experiences they've had. Where do they see evidence of inequity in their practice? Because I think it means a lot more when it's coming from something they've personally been involved with. And then Joanna, Diana, and I really work closely with them to kind of develop the presentation and then deliver it. And as I mentioned, it's expected that faculty and fellows attend these presentations as part of our regular conference series. And then, of course, nursing, respiratory therapists, the rest of our frontline clinicians, and our social workers are always invited and often very much encouraged to attend, but don't have that same sort of mandated attendance that the docs do. Next slide. And so I want to be clear that, this is one format that we have, and it works for us, but it is absolutely not perfect. It is absolutely not a panacea. I think that there are ways that we really would love to, we wish that things could have been different or could be better. So I want to be transparent about, choices that we made and how maybe other groups who are doing this kind of work have chosen something different. So first, I think what our conference is missing is a true interdisciplinary approach. And so while we have often interdisciplinary attendees, I would love for us to work with our colleagues across all of the NICU staff in order to have more consistent engagement as far as developing and presenting these conferences. Because we've recognized again and again that the biases and the cases that we discuss often reflect biases across the entire care team. So it really is important to work with all care team members to make change. And I think that people who have different experiences bring a very unique perspective too. And the challenges around that have really just been an ability to mandate attendance and to compensate people for their time in those roles. Second, I think one thing we're still working on is managing the discussion, not getting sidetracked on small medical details, often having some time management where we really don't get to delve into the brainstorming or action piece. And it's hard when an hour is kind of all we have. Third, and this is a massive thing I think our curriculum is missing, is that we really don't have any formal kind of evaluation. It had been something Katie and I had discussed at length when we were starting this. And I think at that point, we didn't have the bandwidth or the experience. And now I really regret that that's not something we had worked in a little bit more. So I think we realized that we don't have a way of understanding how this conference is affecting attitudes, beliefs, or actions of either our participants or the fellows who are presenting, not to even mention the experience that our patients are having. So I think we had a difficult conversation in one of our last conferences where we realized that many of our participants who have been receiving this curriculum for the last couple of years couldn't really articulate what a social determinant of health was and how that influenced care and how it was our role as part of the care team to address those. And I think to me, that was hard feedback to get, but really important feedback to get, to recognize like, oh, there is a lot of more room and a lot more work this conference could be doing to kind of clearly make those educational points. And lastly, I think the primary goal of this conference really is to educate folks about the impact of personal biases and systemic racism on the care of infants. But of course, we have lofty visions that we could inspire action, both within individuals and across the institution. And often we have really great ideas with these discussions that can talk about how we generate change, but it can be really challenging to capitalize on the momentum of the conference. And I think that, they're only happening 3 times a year, so people forget, and there's no real accountability for some of the actions we discussed. And when people have really great ideas about change, it's challenging to be able to assign responsibility to act on those further. So I would love to talk and be happy to talk a little bit more about these particular challenges when we get our small group sessions.
I'll just briefly touch on the fact that we did kind of try to translate this conference series into a written case series that is recurring within NEO reviews. So there have been a couple thus far, and kind of the goal there was, we wanted to reach a wider audience. Like Daria said, we did have pretty lofty visions. And then B, we also wanted to make this available to folks who might be at smaller institutions or institutions that aren't necessarily able to support a full-on health equity conference, but might be able to do a journal club or something like that to have discussions. So this is something that anyone can pick up and read who has a subscription to NEO Reviews, and a way that, kind of a low-hanging fruit way that people might be able to approach something similar within their institution. And then just so many thank yous. We certainly, to the health equity pioneers at Boston Medical Center, to everyone at CHOP who really supported and mentored Daria and I through this, as well as for all of the institutional support that we did receive at CHOP, and that Daria, Joanna, and Diana continue to receive there, and to the fellows who have been very willing guinea pigs in this experiment.
Thank you both for such a huge effort on your parts to create something like this. I think this is a really nice space to for action to grow. And like you were very honest about, limitations of what you've done so far. But I think this is really, really important, and really important for all of us to hear, for folks who are trying to create something like this health equity rounds in their institution. So really appreciate providing the scaffolding for our small group discussion to talk about how it was done at CHOP, but also how it could be done at your institution, or how it's already done, what's working well and not. But before we go into that small group discussion, Dr. Reynolds is going to tell us about an opportunity for a multi-institution effort as we all think about how we can create something like this at our institutions.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us a second just to talk about this endeavor. And thank you, Daria and Katie, for your guidance and your presentation. It was great and very inspiring for us going forward. But there has been a lot of interest, especially in the field of neonatology, and kind of collaborating to create this multi-institution, almost like a framework or a toolkit. I know a lot exists, but kind of just sharing all of these ideas, sharing all of these barriers and situations that may come up when creating it amongst your own institution, just so we could collectively come together, share our ideas, and share resources as well. But in addition to that, there is going to be a scholarly component to it, where we are going to look further into an evaluation tool, as Katie and Daria alluded to, just to kind of really optimize all these interventions that we're doing to make sure that we are doing the things that are most efficacious to get the result that we would like. So if you scan this QR code, it takes you to a survey, and there's some questions like your name and your email address. But then on there, it also, you can indicate how involved you would like to be going forward. So it could be minimally, where you're getting updates on what's going on and kind of updates that we have, and kind of how these institutions are coming together, to being very involved, where you're an author on any scholarly activity. So we are excited for everyone to come together and be a part of this, and look forward to talking and meeting with everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Reynolds. This is exactly kind of what we wanted the NJC to be, is a space for people to connect across institutions and share learnings with each other. And like, this is very new to a lot of people. So really, really appreciate the alignment and thinking about how we can work together while creating something like this, because creating curriculums are pretty big projects and we definitely don't want to recreate the wheel. So without further ado, we're going to go into our small groups and have some discussion about everything that we learned and talked about today. So Melanie's going to put us into small groups. We will be discussing these questions. There's actually a link that's in the, that we'll put in the Google or the chat that has these questions, because we want this to be a live document. So you guys writing down the answers or things that you guys are talking about within your groups. So each group has a different number on the document, so you can put in notes there about the types of conversations that you're having, because that's going to help inform something like the multi-institution effort that Dr. Reynolds described. So the link to the chat, thank you, Stephanie. So pull up the Google Doc that has the questions and then the place to write your guys' discussion. And we're going to spend the rest of the meeting here, these 20 minutes. So without further ado, we will get into our small groups.
All right, there's gonna be a little bit of shuffling, so bear with me. Hopefully everything will be figured out within the next minute.
Great. Sounds good. Just briefly, the types of things, we want introductions to happen in your groups, followed by your experience. Have you participated in a health equity rounds, and what was that like? How does that compare to what an ideal health equity rounds would look like? And then what specific components were a part of the health equity rounds, and how did it exist versus how would you ideally have a health equity round? So what types of topics, who leads it, who provides the content, who attends, does someone fund it? Because this is a ton of work. Do you guys evaluate it to determine efficacy, and what would that evaluation even look like? What outcomes are meaningful to families, to trainees, to the staff who are participating? What are challenges? And then how is the presentation or discussion occurring? So lots to discuss. Melanie, you need a little bit more time to put folks into rooms, because if so, we can do a little bit of Q&A with Katie and Daria.
I think people should be moving in.
Okay, great. Thank you, thank you.
Melanie, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I see something that says broadcast, and obviously I'm not going to close all rooms.
Oh, wait. That's just me. I'm gonna assign Kayla to another one. You're gonna go to room 5.
Thank you.
Do I get to go someplace or no?
I
I might
don't
not
know.
because I'm the
Yeah.
host. Oh, I can assign you.
I might hang out here, but can
Okay.
you assign yourself or?
Oh, I can join. Yeah. Is there one that
Yeah,
you want me to
I
join?
can't.
Oh,
Let's
there's
see.
one that has 4. Do you want me to do that one? 5,
Um,
6, 5. You tell me wherever you want me to go.
let's see. I'm trying to find a room that doesn't have as many people. How about room 1?
Yes. Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. There's never enough time. There's like a whole big conversation to be had and lots of discussion points, but wanted this to be at least the beginning of a conversation. So I know there's lots of important and interesting conversations happening that we just cut short, but really glad to at least start the conversation. If you want to talk more and be involved, especially in this multi-institution effort, make sure that you fill out that survey and continue on with the conversation. And we're of course putting up our general NJC survey. So we want to make sure that these are helpful to you guys and of interest and align with your needs as neonatal justice collaborative members. So please fill out our survey. I know you fill out lots of surveys, but let us know what you want to see more of for future sessions, and what's working well, what's not, et cetera. So that concludes our January NJC general body meeting. So thank you guys so much for participating, and we'll have this recording up on our website. So thank you guys and have a great day.
The feedback form is in the chat now. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Stephanie. Appreciate it.